Good day and welcome to another episode of Whiteboard series. Today I'll be talking about the key concept of this topic on energy in food. Now to start us off for this topic, alright, let's firstly think about what is energy, why is energy important, and where do we get our energy from? Now, energy is basically very important, all right, for the daily activities. Now, what kind of daily activities are we talking about? I'm talking about breathing, growing, reproducing. So all these activities actually requires energy in order to function. Now, where do we then obtain our energy from? So as all of you would have already known, we always have this common saying that, oh, you need to eat food in order to get energy, and that is absolutely right. So in this topic, we're going to revisit some very important concepts, all right, and the two important concepts or processes that we have learned about would be digestion and respiration. Now, the energy that we actually get actually comes from the food that we eat. Now, when we ingest this food, we cannot straight away obtain energy from it. Now, there is a process that it needs to undergo, and that is digestion. Now, what digestion does is that it breaks up these large particles of food that we have taken into very, very small dissolvable size so that it can be absorbed into our bloodstream. Now, the simplest type of food that we will get after digestion is a simple sugar known as glucose. Of course, there are other types of nutrients such as amino acids and everything else, but that is out of syllabus and I will not be talking about that. So glucose is the most simplest type of sugar that you can get. And if you remember correctly, there is a process that happens in every single cell, and that is something called respiration. Now, your respiration is a process that happens inside every cell. Now, the whole idea of respiration is to obtain energy, all right, from your digested food, which is glucose. Now, there is a word equation for respiration, and the word equation is very important in helping us understand how does our body function and why are certain systems so important, such as your respiratory system as well as your digestion system. So in order for respiration to happen in your cells, you will need the following. You will need oxygen together with glucose, which will give you water, carbon dioxide, as well as, most importantly, energy. So let's backtrack for a bit. Remember, I told you that the food that we have taken in would be digested, and that's where we would obtain glucose as one of the end products. Now, this glucose over here is the very same one that is involved in your respiration process that happens in every single cell. Now, you realize that I am very careful about saying that respiration happens in the cells. That's because students always have this misconception that respiratory system or when you respire and respiration, they are the same thing. No. When you respire, you're talking about the physical aspect of taking in oxygen and giving out carbon dioxide. So this is a physical phenomenal that you actually can see something happening. But for your respiration, it is a chemical reaction that happens inside every single cell that breaks down your glucose in order to obtain your energy. Alright? So your oxygen that is needed for respiration actually comes from your respiratory system. So if you recall, your respiratory system will include your lungs, right? So your lungs is where the site of gaseous exchange actually happens, whereby oxygen is taken in to the bloodstream and carbon dioxide is given out. And when it's inside your bloodstream, it will flow around your body. So together with your glucose, these two items will then undergo a process known as respiration to release the energy. Now, while that is happening, you have waste products that is actually being produced. And in this case, it will actually be your water and carbon dioxide. So water can be, excess water, I mean, a lot of people may think that, oh wow, water is an essential component. Yes, it is. But it doesn't mean that it cannot be a waste product. Too much of anything is actually bad for your body. In fact, too much water in your body can cause your cells to burst. Alright, and that is the reason why it's important to not have too much water. So this is just a sidetrack a little bit. In plant cells, that doesn't happen because your plant cells have a cell wall. But for animal cells, if you recall, the cell wall is not there. So if there's too much water, your cells are going to burst. So your body can remove excess water either through sweating or when you respire out water vapor, you breathe out the water vapor, or when you urinate. So this is some way of passing out excess water. And that is where water becomes a waste product. So carbon dioxide is always a waste product. We breathe it out. Alright? So I'm sure you already understand this together with your circulatory system, where you know that deoxygenated blood contains high amount of carbon dioxide, which needs to be delivered to your lungs for it to be expired out. Alright, I'm just doing a little bit of recap to help you see how the systems actually interlink between each other. The interplay between your respiratory, digestive, as well as your circulatory system. Now that we have gotten this part clear, the next part I want to talk about is that how is it that your energy is stored in the food that you eat? Now, we have to recognize one thing, that we cannot produce our own food. Alright? We can't do that. There is a type of organism that we're very familiar with that is able to do that, and that is our plants. Yay for them. So we actually obtain our energy either directly or indirectly from the plants. What do I mean by that? So basically, you can either eat the plants, right, like you eat vegetables, or you can actually eat the animals that eat the plants. For example, if you are eating chicken, chicken would then eat seeds, which comes from the plants. Right, so that's one way of having an indirect way of obtaining energy from plants. But ultimately, you have to understand that plants are able to undergo a very special process known as photosynthesis. Now, where does this photosynthesis happen? It happens inside leaves, okay, which has cells that contain your chlorophyll in the chloroplast. So let's do a little bit of recap here for your plant cells. So in your plant cells, right, I'm just going to quickly scribble a plant cell. Let's just say it's from the leaf. You have a structure that looks something like this. And then you also have these structures that are green in color. Now I'm just going to very quickly do a quick label of this so that we can do a quick revision as well. So this is actually your cell wall, cell membrane, cytoplasm, This is your chloroplast. And vacuole. And of course, not forgetting, which I almost did, your nucleus. Right, so this is a very quick label of the different parts that's found in a typical leaf cell. Now, your chloroplast is special because it contains chlorophyll. And what does your chlorophyll does is that it's able to trap sunlight for photosynthesis to occur. Now, we keep talking about photosynthesis. So what is so great about this photosynthesis? Now, the reason why this photosynthesis is so important is because it's able to trap light energy in the form of food. That is something that we are not able to do, all right, as human beings. If we are able to trap and utilize energy from the sun, we wouldn't need the plant. But unfortunately, we are not able to do that. So the plant actually does this conversion of energy into a form of food energy for us, whereby we can take in food and then obtain this energy that was trapped for us by the plant. So this making of food is called the photosynthesis. Now there is a very, very important word equation that you need to remember and memorize. So first up, what is a word equation? Now a word equation is basically an equation that tells you the formula or the recipe for making something or for a process to happen. So in the case of photosynthesis, there are certain factors that you need in order for it to happen. Now the first ingredient that you would need is actually carbon dioxide. Now before I continue, I just want to let you know that photosynthesis and respiration, they are actually two very opposite reactions. Whatever that is a waste product in one reaction is actually a required item for another. For example, carbon dioxide is actually a waste product of respiration. If you recall, let's very quickly skip back there. There you go, carbon dioxide. However, I'm just going to put here waste products. However, in your photosynthesis, it is actually a required item. Similarly for your water, which is a waste product, once again, over in photosynthesis, over in respiration, is actually a product that you need, or it's rather a raw material that you need for photosynthesis. And then, obviously, you're trapping light energy. Now, the common misconception here is students tend to think that plants can only photosynthesize under sunlight. That is wrong. If you think about it, there are a lot of indoor plants nowadays where you can use artificial lighting. It doesn't have to be the sun. So it is not correct to say that plants photosynthesize only in the presence of sunlight. No, it's actually in the presence of light energy. All right? And not forgetting, you will need your chlorophyll, which is found in your chloroplast in plant cells, to trap this light energy. And what you get at the end of this reaction would be glucose. If you remember, glucose is actually the raw material for respiration, together with oxygen. And once again, oxygen is actually the raw material for respiration to happen. But in this case, it's the product. So respiration and photosynthesis, they are actually very opposite of each other. Now, it makes perfect sense because photosynthesis is like creating something. Okay, think about it, synthesis. The word synthesis means to create something. And then you have respiration, which is actually the breaking down of your glucose to obtain the energy that was trapped inside the first place. So one is about making and the other one is about breaking down. All right? So The first thing you're going to need to understand is that there are a few factors that is needed here. I'm just going to number them. Carbon dioxide, water, and light. These are the three important ingredients needed for photosynthesis to occur. Now, many of times you will see that in a lot of experiments, they will actually vary this concentration of these three factors in order to affect the rate of photosynthesis. Now, there is a question that as to why can't we have more chlorophyll then? Well, you can't just exactly obtain chlorophyll and inject it into your cells. It doesn't work that way. It's way too complicated and it's way too complex at your level at least for your experiments, for you to answer questions. So they always like to assess you based on carbon dioxide, water, and light, these three variables. So even without looking at any experiments, straight off the back, just by looking at this equation, you already know that by adjusting any concentration of any one of these factors concentration, you will affect the rate of photosynthesis. What do I mean by that? Take for example, you know that carbon dioxide is needed, right? So if you're able to actually increase the amount of carbon dioxide in an experimental setup, you would actually be able to then increase the rate of photosynthesis simply because that you have more materials to work with. However, you will also need to understand that increasing carbon dioxide can only increase photosynthesis up to a certain time point. Why? Because at certain time point, the rest of your materials, all right, if you do not increase them, it's going to become a limiting factor. What do I mean by that? Very simple. Now, with every chemical reaction, there is always sort of like a ratio. For example, let's just say you want to bake a cake. And let's just say with every cake, you need 2 eggs and 100 grams of flour. Okay, so I'm just going to give you a very quick example here. And that is equivalent to 1 cake. Now, I can actually give you 10 eggs. If I give you 10 eggs, but only 600 grams of flour, right? Now, if you look at this equation, you know that even though I have 600 grams of flour, I can only make 5 cakes with a remnant of 100 grams of flour. Right? Think about it. That's because even though I do not have enough eggs to actually make another cake. In order to do that, I will need another 2 more eggs, taking the total to 12 eggs. So there's no point to keep increasing in one factor only. This only happens up to a certain extent. All right? So I just want you to keep that at the back of your mind, that increasing one doesn't mean that it will forever increase the rate of photosynthesis. You will also need to increase the other factors as well. Now, I would also like to point out that this glucose is the one that has energy trapped in it. And this is the source of energy for us, in fact, right? So if you look back at your word equation for respiration, glucose is actually our key ingredient, right? Now, there are also various experiments that is commonly tested for you to tell the rate of reaction for photosynthesis. Now, the key idea here is to be very aware of how these different factors would affect your rate of photosynthesis. So an increase in carbon dioxide or an increase in water or an increase in light will definitely speed up your rate of photosynthesis. Now, you have to understand that your glucose that is produced by your plants over here, if there is an excess, it will get stored as starch. So where can you find this starch? You can find this starch in your roots, alright? So during a rainy day in this case, I don't mean really rainy days, but during days that there is actually very dry and there is actually your plants are not able to photosynthesize and make food, your plants can actually tap into this reserve in your roots, all right, and convert the starch back into glucose for usage. All right. Now, another important thing that we need to understand in this chapter is about how your plants actually would carry out the two process of photosynthesis and respiration at the same time. All right, so I just want to clear up this misconception. Maybe the word is not versus. I will put and respiration in plants. I just want to talk about it. Now, photosynthesis in plants takes place only when there is enough light, carbon dioxide, CO2 is carbon dioxide, but please do not put this in your exam. You're not allowed to, you spell it in full, as well as water, together with chlorophyll. However, respiration takes place all the time. Now, this is one thing that I really want to stress. Now, there is a lot of misconception whereby students think that when photosynthesis takes place, respiration doesn't. No, your respiration would still take place. So a very common misconception is caused by this experiment. And what happens in this experiment is that you're given a bell jar and a plant that's inside the bell jar. Okay, this bell jar is then exposed to your sun. Okay, and what happens is that they analyze the composition of the air, all right, at the start and before. So let's just say at the start of the experiment, you have 10 units of oxygen, and at the end, okay, 10 units of oxygen and say 2 units of carbon dioxide. And at the end of the experiment, you realize that there becomes something like 20 units of oxygen and maybe just 0.2 units of carbon dioxide. So what has happened here is, because of this, people tend to think that photosynthesis has occurred only. Why? Because there is an increase in your oxygen. So we know that according to the word equation, let's go back, all right, oxygen is produced as one of the main product. So if photosynthesis is happening, oxygen level should go up, which is what the experiment has shown at the end, right? And at the same time, they also realized that your carbon dioxide has dropped. As compared to the initial 2 units, it has dropped to 0.2. So this is also inconsistent with what is happening, whereby carbon dioxide is being used up for photosynthesis, hence there is a drop. Now, the case is not, all right? Respiration happens all the time, all the time. Now, what is happening is that the rate of photosynthesis is faster than the rate of respiration. So when this happens, your rate of respiration is actually slower. So what happens is, recall in your respiration, what you need is oxygen. And your photosynthesis actually produces oxygen. However, after using whatever oxygen that is required for your respiration, you still have excess oxygen, and that's why your plant is giving out oxygen. So this oxygen, this amount of oxygen that is given out is actually excess after you have removed the amount that you need for your respiration. Alright, so we really need to get this point cleared up. If not, there's going to be a huge issue. So if you're going to remove away the sun, let's just say at night, there's no more sun, take note that your respiration will still happen. Remember, I told you respiration happens 24 hours. So what you should see is, instead of having an increased amount of oxygen, there will be a drop in oxygen. So maybe say you're left with only 2 units of oxygen after 2 hours. And your carbon dioxide should increase to about maybe 4 units of carbon dioxide, because now in respiration you produce carbon dioxide as a waste product and you're breathing it out. Alright, so this is something that we really need to be clear about. Now, other common examples of how the different factors can affect your photosynthesis would include many. I just want to talk about some common experiments that you might come across. So I'm just going to name these experiments looking at factors affecting rate of photosynthesis. So there are many different experiments now, but we need to first identify what are some factors that they like to look at. So with this, you always refer to the word equation. So we know that carbon dioxide is needed, so one of it would be carbon dioxide, that's for sure. Another factor would be water. Alright, that's one. And a very common one that they look at is light intensity. So we know that based on theory, because we know our word equation, any increase in these will all result in an increase in rate of photosynthesis. Alright, I just want to highlight this to you. But of course, you need to look at the results of the experiment. There could be other factors that they have introduced in order to make the question novel. But generally, that's the case. Alright? At least up to a certain point. Now, the very common example that you will see is they like to use water plants. They like to use water plants. And then after that, you have your water plants trapped inside this test tube or funnel. Okay, and then what happens is that it's placed in a beaker. Alright, now, why do they always like to use water plant is that you can actually see the rate of reaction happening. You will actually see tiny bubbles coming out of your water plant. Now, these tiny air bubbles, okay, is actually oxygen. Now, if you recall, oxygen is actually the waste product of photosynthesis. So if you take a look at this equation again, so because oxygen is produced as a byproduct of photosynthesis, then of course the more the faster the rate of photosynthesis happen, then you get more bubbles. All right, that is something that is very logical. So you're able to actually see that happening. Literally, you can do this experiment. What can they do? They can have a lamp, all right, and then they tell you that, okay, you know, this is a lamp, and then I can change the distance. So obviously, the smaller the distance over here, the higher the light intensity. So the faster the rate of photosynthesis and the more bubbles you should be seeing, right? They can also say, all right, instead of doing that, I have decided to measure the amount of bubbles that is being produced. Or if not, believe it or not, they can even talk about pressure, because the more air that is being produced over here, the higher the pressure. So they can literally put a probe, okay, a data logger attached to a probe to actually talk about pressure. So the higher the pressure, the more gas is being produced. Or you could just physically count the number of bubbles produced per minute. That is one way of telling the rate of photosynthesis. So you could put a line there, and that will talk about light intensity. Carbon dioxide, they can add some chemicals into the water. So usually they will tell you that, oh, certain chemical was added to actually increase the concentration of carbon dioxide. Or they could even introduce animals in it. So they've got fishes, right? Think about it. So when you have fishes, the fish will actually carry out respiration. So the more fish you have, the more respiration happen. And what is a byproduct of respiration? Or which gas? You got it, carbon dioxide. Carbon dioxide is actually a byproduct of respiration, which then can be used by the plants here to actually photosynthesize. So therefore, when you think about it, there's many ways that they could test you on actually the rate of photosynthesis. They can even test on the composition of the air. Like, for example, the previous one that I talked about in this experiment, just by looking at the composition of air, you can tell whether photosynthesis has occurred. So like in the earlier experiment, where the sun was present for this experiment, there was an increase in your carbon dioxide, an increase in your oxygen, right? Quite significantly. Now that's because photosynthesis has occurred. So the more oxygen there is, obviously the faster the rate of photosynthesis. So really this topic is about understanding what exactly is photosynthesis, what are the materials needed for photosynthesis to happen, the substances needed, and what are the products of it. All right, so the best way to do it is always to go back to the word equation. That is very important. So whenever you're attempting a question, doesn't matter which question you're attempting, always look at the word equation for photosynthesis in order to analyze and break down the question. So I hope I have helped you to gain a greater understanding of the application of experiments in photosynthesis. All right, thank you and have a nice day.